one of the reasons too, it's really important as a infant child to have exposure to microbes early. And this is, I talk a lot about the idea of the hygiene hypothesis and how, because that's actually when I was doing my allergy fellowship, that's what we talked about. Oh, the hygiene hypothesis, right? They had done this study showing that kids who grew up in, I think it was East Germany versus West Germany, when the wall was up. So we're talking, in the 70s, 80s, that children who grew up in East Germany who had, farm animals and cows and not quite access to the modern conveniences of West Germany actually had less allergies. And the kids who grew up in West Germany had a lot more allergies. And they said, oh, it's probably because these children were exposed in West Germany to antibiotics and highly sanitized water, and they didn't, they had pasteurized milk, et cetera, et cetera. And, that might be part of it, but really it's probably that they were exposed. It's not the issue that they weren't exposed to pathogens, is that they may not have been exposed to friendly bacteria.
Did you know that there's a superhero inside you? It's called your immune system. Is your immune system strong? Is your immune system balanced? Or ideally, is it both? We're going to be talking about these topics today with Dr. Heather Moday. Dr. Moday is a functional medicine doctor who specializes in immunology and has a new book about the 4 immunotypes called the Immunotype Breakthrough. This is a personalized plan for how to balance your immune system, optimize health, and build lifelong resilience. I am Dr. Andrew Wong, co-founder of Capital Integrative Health. This is a podcast dedicated to transforming the consciousness around what it means to be healthy and understanding the root causes of both disease and wellness. And in this podcast, we're going to really focus today and take a deep dive into the immune system. Join us for a conversation about how supporting your immunity using sleep, stress reduction, nutrition, and much more can help to strengthen and balance your immune system. Welcome, Heather, to our podcast. Thanks so much for being on today.
Thank you, Andrew. It's really fun to be here.
And of course, it's so nice to reconnect with you after our fellowship days. This was actually like 8 years ago now, I think, which seems like a long time, but
I know
time flies.
It seems like not long ago, but at the same time, it seems I feel like a lot has gone on in that time.
Yes, absolutely. Not the least of which is the pandemic, and I don't want to get too heavy right away, but I know we're talking today about the immune system, so I want to give you congratulations, first of all, this amazing book, new book that you have written called the Immunotype Breakthrough, which is basically the subtitle. I want to read this out because I think it's really great for listeners to hear this. Your personalized plan to balance your immune system, optimize health, and build lifelong resilience. I just love that title and just kind of going through the book and reading it myself. It's an amazing book, so everyone needs to check that out. We'll have more about that at the end here, but I wanted to also say that Mark Hyman, who I know is one of the functional gurus that we learn from and follow in the IFM, said that this is the most important guide available today to understanding and optimizing your immune function. So that's really high praise from Dr. Hyman. So that's congrats on that.
Yeah, I was really humbled to get that, quite honestly. It was pretty amazing. So I'm glad that he liked it, and I hope that other people get a lot out of it when they read it.
Yes, definitely. Let's talk first about the immune system. I think let's take a deep dive in a little bit, but starting broad first, generally speaking, what is our immune system? We've all heard about it over the last couple of years. We're all concerned about how to get the immune system, sort of up to speed, so to speak. But what is our immune system, and why is it so important?
So our immune system really is it is a system of cells and organs, and also, I would say, chemicals, right? So, the immune system really is present in all parts of the body. It's not like other organ systems where, like the heart or the lungs, that you might just have one organ system in one place. The immune system really is everywhere. And that's because we need immune activity everywhere. And so there's a whole series of different kinds of cells that have very specialized jobs. There are organ systems or organs that play a very big role in providing places for these cells to develop and then also to hang out and sort of be ready. But also, a lot of the tissues of our body have immune functions. So we don't really think about this, but like our skin, the lining of our intestinal tract, the lining of our respiratory tract, our stomach acid, a lot of enzymes, they actually play a role in our innate immunity. So really, it's a system that is in place to protect us from harm. And that can be everything from microbes and things that we would typically think of, like bacteria, viruses, but also even chemical toxins, things that are going to damage our cells. And the other thing too is that it's part of our repair system. It's what helps us repair from injury. It helps us recover from illness. It helps us with, basically the onslaught of things that we're exposed to during our life. So like all of the toxins and free radicals, it's there to help us to repair all of our organs and cells so that we can live to a nice hearty age versus dying when we're very young. So it actually has a lot of different roles in terms of of a system. And that's why I think it can be a little perplexing and a little overwhelming for people to understand, because it you can't really put it in a box.
Yeah. And let's talk, and will be a little bit of a preface towards the 4 different immunotypes that you talk about in your book. But let's talk about self versus non-self. What is the role of the immune system in differentiating that between those two aspects?
Yeah. So this is a really important sort of like tenet of immunity, is that our immune cells need to differentiate between self tissue, or like our own human cells, and non-human cells. And the reason is, obviously, if it can't do that, then it could be attacking our own tissues. And of course, that does happen in the case of autoimmune disease. But when we develop certain cells, for example, a certain a type of cell called lymphocytes or T cells, when these T cells are born or developed, they go through like almost like a test that they have to prove that they can ignore, or what we call tolerate, our own self tissue. And it's almost like if you're training a dog, right? So if you have
It's
a
an immune
dog,
academy, yeah. It's an
right?
immune
It's the
academy.
immune academy, and the dog, you put the treat down, and the dog wants. If the dog is able to look at the treat and look away, then it's passed the test, right? We sort of have the same thing, but instead, these T cells, if they're like, oh, that's a cell I'm going to attack, and it turns out to be a human skin cell or a human thyroid cell or whatever, that T cell literally gets destroyed. Okay, so it gets annihilated.
The
And
consequences are pretty severe then for the T
pretty severe,
cells.
yes, they are
Yeah.
killed. Now, granted, there are a few that make it through and circulate, and a lot of times don't cause a lot of problems. But that if that does get out of control, or if we lose this tolerance over time, you can develop autoimmune issues and other problems. Yeah.
Yeah, so it sounds like the immune system has many, many different roles. Just to recap what you said, defending and protecting, repairing, also kind of differentiating self from non-self, and this immune tolerance after going through that immune academy, it sounds like.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I love this question. I wanted to bring this up to you because really during this pandemic time, we've all been sort of focusing on, I think certainly in the popular media, about, boosting the immune system. How do we get the immune system stronger? How do we make that,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
higher, faster, bigger, stronger kind of thing? And I think it sounds like from reading your book, that the Immunotype Breakthrough, that there are certain people that, depending on their type of immune system that they have, they would benefit from a boost of the immune system. But then there's
Sure.
other people that maybe have a different immunotype that maybe the boosting would not be helpful.
Right. So, when we talk about boosting, at least my interpretation is we want a stronger immune response. Okay. So, and this sort of brings up the idea of inflammation. So, inflammation is a cornerstone central aspect of how our immune system works, or at least how, some of the cells work. And inflammation is it's a whole sort of pathway that occurs, that something comes into the body or something needs to be repaired in the body. It initiates different cells that come in at different time periods. They actually create an inflammatory response, but that inflammatory response may be to kill something or to repair something, but then it has to be resolved. And so that's inflammation is super, super important. And some people may have actually a very good ability to recognize pathogens and to kill them. Um, so those people may not need an excessive amount of boosting, especially if they also have, say, some issues with we call a misguided immune response. So that would be a autoimmune response. They're already misguided, so they're attacking their own tissue. So you wouldn't want to really boost that. Then there's some people that are already sort of very inflamed. They're putting out fires all over their body. So they might be dealing with obesity. They're already dealing with heart disease or elevated blood sugar. These are things that might be causing inflammation throughout the body. They may not need really more of an increase in inflammation, which when we talk about boosting, we're really talking about aiding cells that create inflammatory cytokines, which are these, chemical messengers, which if they go too far, it's like the Goldilocks effect, right? You want it to be perfect, because if it gets too high, if the fire gets too high, that's not a good thing either. So the people who really need, and we all probably need immune boosting at certain times in our life, because we change obviously throughout our life, are people who maybe aren't having a very quick or robust response to pathogens. This can occur in the very, very young. This can occur in the elderly. This can occur in people who are extremely stressed or who have nutritional deficiencies, or even people who might have lowered immune responses because of medication or chronic disease. So people with cancer, things like that. So there's definitely people who need a boost, but not everybody does.
Got it. And let's go through the 4 primary immunotypes that you talk about in your book, The Immunotype Breakthrough, and then maybe you could kind of provide an outline for how you would approach them differently as a clinician.
Sure. So the first one, which I think is the one that I think a lot of people in the United States fall into, is what I call the smoldering immunotype. Because, just to give a background, when I was thinking about writing this book, and it really was because I felt like most people had this very black and white idea of how the immune system works. It's on, it's off, it's on, it's off. And that's just not how it works, right? And many of us are walking around with chronic inflammation that isn't really showing up on the surface necessarily as a disease. We might have things like hypertension or smoldering heart disease that people don't find out about until they have a heart attack, or maybe their blood sugar is a little high, but they haven't been diagnosed with diabetes. Maybe they have some arthritis that's not autoimmune in nature. So these people are the smoldering type. They have oftentimes they have slight elevations in certain cytokines. They might have tests that show that they have a little bit more inflammation. And then they have some of these, sort of lifestyle diseases that are driven by these fires that they're putting out in the body. So this is sometimes very quiet, this inflammation, until it's not. So that's sort of the smoldering type. And the reason why it's really important to look at this is that most of our chronic diseases are coming out of this. So everything from Alzheimer's disease to heart disease, diabetes, etc. But also, when over time, if we are very sort of distracted and we are trying to deal with, chronic inflammation, we may not respond so well to, say, a novel virus. And this is sort of what we saw in the beginning of COVID. It's, not in everybody, but especially people who did have, say, overt diabetes, people who were very obese, and, people who had, say, lung disease, inflammation there. They weren't able to have a really good rapid response to this novel virus because there was no memory of it. And by the time it sort of spread enough in the cells, as viruses do, we were sort of making these Hail Mary passes in the end. And unfortunately, people ended up dying from sepsis and cytokine storms and things like that. So that can happen. So that's the smoldering type. And so, those people, you really, really, really want to double down on, looking at lifestyle, looking at diet, looking at things that can be driving chronic inflammation. And there's obviously many of those things. The next, I would say, on the list would be the weak, which is sort of the opposite, right? So this is probably, I would say, the least common in a way, because we live in a Western world where most people have access to good food for the most part. I mean, maybe junky food, but we don't have a lot of malnutrition. We are dealing with, most people have some access to care. So people are growing up for the most part with a okay immune reaction. So there are people obviously who are born with congenital issues that cause immune weakening, people who develop cancer who might get on immune suppressive drugs, HIV, obviously. And then, but we do have some people who just, through chronic stress or GI issues or really poor nutrition, their immune system is going to be weakened. And so they're going to have a hard time clearing things like viruses, clearing things like bacteria. I say these are the people who get sick all the time. They say, oh, everything comes around, I get it. I get bronchitis for weeks. I get chronic, illness for weeks. I can't always recover, or I'm exhausted, et cetera. So that's sort of the weak immunotype. And then the misguided is probably the most complicated. Those are people literally with autoimmune disease. It sort of covers a very large swath of people. But with autoimmune disease, there has to be some sort of inflammation first. And so it's driven by an underlying trigger. Now, that trigger can be lots of different things, as we're seeing. Sometimes it's a occult virus. So we see that with Epstein-Barr virus, things like that, Lyme disease, mold toxin, stress, other toxins, gut leakiness. So lots of things can cause the immune system to become misguided and start reacting towards self-tissue. And then last is the hyperactive. And so hyperactive is also inflamed, but inflamed in a different way. So these are people who actually make a very specific type of immune response. It's an allergic response, and it's a totally different kind, sort of, I want to say, corner of the immune system. They tend to make antibodies of a certain type, what are called IgE type. They stimulate cells that release histamine. So these are people who tend to have allergies, eczema, chronic sinusitis, asthma, all of these we call atopic or allergic type of issues, food issues, obviously food sensitivities and allergies. But it's still inflammatory. It's working a different way. So it's really important to sort of look at these differently. They're not all the same.
Thank you for that brilliant overview of the immune system. I feel like I just went to medical school all over again. Subspecialty. I have a lot of sub questions that were generated from that, but one of the things is that it kind of reminds me of something we learned in fellowship, which is the Ayurvedic doshas, right? There's Pitta, Kapha, Vata, and I wonder if, like you said, as the body changes over time, maybe nutritional needs change over time. Do people's immunotypes, could they also change over time? And then the other sort of sub question, if you don't mind answering them together, is can they be combined? Can someone have a weak and misguided or something like that?
So absolutely. We are not static creatures. And it's really the things that we encounter through life and the way that we live our life that changes our immune system. So we're very adaptable creatures. And that's another thing that we can change this, which is, of course, why I wrote the book. So just like the doshas, right? So you might have a primary dosha, vata, pitta, kapha, but it can become imbalanced. And, with this, a lot of times it's okay. So when you were born, right, were you breastfed? Were you vaginally delivered? That might put you in a different category. Like if you didn't have those benefits, you might have a slightly more weak immunotype, or you might develop a lot of childhood allergies. But then there's people who they were very healthy, and you probably see this with a lot of your clients. They didn't have any childhood illness, everything was great, but then they went to college, and they I don't know, they went to, let's just say they went to Southeast Asia or Africa, and they picked up a parasite or something happened. They came back, they started having diarrhea, and then they started having GI issues, and then all of a sudden they developed food allergies, and then they started getting asthma. Or maybe they got Epstein-Barr virus as a teenager, and then they went to college, and then their father died, and they went through a period of stress, and which was, a tremendous, and then they were diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis or something. So, it is how the environment works on our genes, turning things on and off. And our immune system, is going to change based on that. And
Yes.
but yeah, you can absolutely have people when they take the quiz, and so people take the Immunotype quiz, and they'll say, well, I'm sort of a little bit of the smoldering, and I'm a little bit of the misguided. And I said, absolutely, you can be that, you should be that. I mean, so you look at sort of where you score the highest, and that would be sort of the predominant one. So yeah, absolutely,
Where to focus the attention on the most. Got it.
Yes, exactly.
That makes sense. Well, I know we had talked about in the beginning of this conversation about self and non-self and immune tolerance. I'm wondering how the gut is connected to the immune system, specifically the gut microbiome. And are there specific gut microbes that the immune system recognizes as quote unquote self friends, where they wouldn't react as much as, say, the ones that are considered more inflammatory, etc.?
Yeah. And so that's one of the reasons too, it's really important as a infant child to have exposure to microbes early. And this is, I talk a lot about the idea of the hygiene hypothesis, and how, because that's actually when I was doing my allergy fellowship, that's what we talked about. Oh, the hygiene hypothesis, right? They had done this study showing that kids who grew up in, I think it was East Germany versus West Germany, when the wall was up. So we're talking, in the 70s, 80s, that children who grew up in East Germany, who had, farm animals and cows and not quite access to the modern conveniences of West Germany, actually had less allergies. And the kids who grew up in West Germany had a lot more allergies. And they said, oh, it's probably because these children were exposed in West Germany to antibiotics and highly sanitized water, and they didn't, they had pasteurized milk, et cetera, et cetera. And, that might be part of it, but really it's probably that they were exposed. It's not the issue that they weren't exposed to pathogens, is that they may not have been exposed to friendly bacteria. So, our intestinal microbiome, which is mostly in the colon, which is trillions of bacteria and viruses and all sorts of things, yeast forms, they are there for a reason, because they act as teachers. And so we learn very early that certain species are supposed to be there. And our immune system, the cells that, because a lot of our immune cells are hanging out just beyond the surface of the colon. So they're just right outside, sort of right before the bloodstream. There's all these lymphatic areas where they hang out. And they're able to communicate literally with the interior of the colon. And so many of these lactobacilli and, bifidobacterium, but even other ones, even other species that we consider to be sort of inert or not necessarily beneficial, are still important teachers. And so we do learn to sort of tolerate them, and they are beneficial to us over time. When we lose them, we know that there are problems with increased inflammation, loss of tolerance to foods. So it is really, really important to keep our gut microbes very varied and very healthy in terms of number.
Got it. In terms of healthy gut bacteria being some of our greatest teachers to the immune system, is there research on the age at which an average person would have an immune system that matured? In other words, when is it sort of too late to say, okay, I'm going to dig my hands in the soil now, but I'm in my
Right.
40s. Is that actually going to help me if my immune system is
Mhm.
not,
Right.
wasn't exposed as much as a child?
So I don't know if they've ever done studies, proving that. I know that we know, even based on, say, fecal transplants, right? So which is usually occurring in adults who have C. diff or something like that, that that radically changes their health outcomes by literally transplanting a new microbiome. So whether you can get that from, I don't think they've ever done long-term studies, but we obviously know that increasing your natural prebiotic intake and fiber intake will often bring alive a lot of these dormant bacteria that just aren't being fed. By having more fermented foods, you can significantly improve it. Um, Whether they've done human studies like before and after, like doing year long, that would be a great study. If you could take people and control them for, say, 12 months with their diet and use of fermented foods, and sort of do before and after, um, that would be a great study. But we do know that you can resurrect quite a bit of your microbiome and improve your immunity over time. And we've seen that really just with how people's inflammation changes over time.
And
So
and and just like you, I think we do a lot of these stool tests to look at the microbiome. Not sure which
yeah.
one's your favorite, but there's different ones, right? And we even see over a 6 month period, you do a repeat. A lot of times their
Mm-hmm.
gut microbiome is better. It sort of correlates with how they're feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, and I've seen, and I know you probably use a lot of the tests that do the DNA probes, and so a lot of times, um, there will be no, the probe won't be sensitive enough to pick up certain bacteria, so it'll say it's less than the detectable limit, and it'll look like they have none of this normal resident bacteria there. And 6 months later, it's not like you're giving them that bacteria. You're just they're eating differently. They may be taking in some probiotic species, but all of a sudden you'll see this other species completely bloom. So it's there. It's just not getting like the love and support that it needs. So you really can resurrect your microbiome.
Yeah, bringing it out of hibernation, it sounds
Yeah,
like.
exactly, exactly. Yeah.
Well, let's get into what I feel like listeners may want to know about. We're in 2022 when we're taping this. It's still during the pandemic. Hopefully, it's receding a bit, but there's variants always on the horizon and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So, how does the immune terrain impact viral prevalence? I think we're talking generally about viruses, but we can also talk about COVID if you'd like, and also
Mm-hmm.
severity of viruses.
Mm-hmm. So COVID, obviously, or I should say SARS CoV, too.
Yeah.
This is a virus that has been hanging out in an animal population probably for who God knows, decades, right? Just like most of the viruses that we see that we call novel, but they're novel to humans. They're spilling over from these animal populations because of, unfortunately, are how we destroy their ecology and bring them into our environment, and we have no exposure to them. Like, humans have been dealing with coronaviruses for millennia, right? And that's just a big family. But these particular strains we don't have any experience with, and that's why it's so devastating, because we have no natural immunity to them. Although that was debatable in the beginning, they thought some people did. But I think that's why it's scary for people, because they're like, oh my gosh, we've never seen this before. The other thing is that, as we know, viruses, in order to live, they have to exist in animal or human cells in order to replicate. And when they do that, of course, they can mutate. And mutation is very scary because they're usually figuring out ways to become more invasive or to hide themselves better or to, basically become stronger. And that's, a scary thing. So when I think of how can we protect ourselves from so-called novel viruses, we don't have a way of knowing which ones are coming next. I mean, maybe epidemiologists too do, but we can work on our innate immune system. So, our innate immune system is sort of our first line of defense when it comes to allowing things into the body. So, of course, there's barriers to that. There's everything from enzymes in our saliva and tears to enzymes in our stomach and acid in our stomach and that kind of thing. And so that's important. But we have a bunch of cells that circulate throughout the body, which really are looking for the first thing to come in. And these are natural killer cells. There are macrophages. There's this whole family. They're called phagocytes, which basically, either swallow whole things or take them back to the adaptive immune cells. So we really want to have a very active and strong innate immune response. And that's where a lot of the things that you can take, right? So you can make sure you're taking things that can help that. And that's where a lot of the medicinal mushrooms come in. That's where certain antioxidants come in because they can actually make natural killer cells stronger and more active. They can improve cytokine function and so I would say like really working on the innate immune system is very, very, very important. And there's other things with that too. For example, sleep. We know that if you don't sleep, right, you sort of drop the hammer on your ability to actually mount a really good immune response, and then also to mount a response against things like vaccines. So once you do have a vaccine, you can actually improve your response to vaccines through some lifestyle things too.
Yes, and I believe you talk in the book also about autophagy and how intermittent fasting can be helpful. Can you speak to your
Yeah.
experience on that, or either clinically or personally?
Yeah. So autophagy, it's something that, and obviously there's many people that specialize talking about autophagy. Um, it's really a recycling in a way of our cells. We can turn over cells relatively quickly, but we can also sort of improve them. It's almost like we take some of the used up parts and we take them to the central organelle in the cell and we almost like melt them down, right? Get rid of them to make the cell stronger and allow it to live longer. And we know that improved autophagy is helpful for immune cell function. It's important for aging um, and brain function. And autophagy happens, um, I would say, if you want to improve autophagy, one of the best ways to do it is to do some intermittent fasting, because we know that this happens in a state that we are not taking in extra fuel. It's almost like a way for our body, when it doesn't see other fuel coming in, it goes, okay, how can we create energy? How can we improve our function when we don't have the resources? Oh, we can work with what we have. And so, even just overnight fasting, some people don't even fast for 12 hours, which is sort of crazy if you think about it. Like, evolutionarily, we were meant to probably fast a lot more than that. But, we have food everywhere now. So a lot of people don't even get their 12 hours overnight. So I tell people, first of all, start with 12 hours. Make sure you can do that. You're not, snacking at night. And then try to incrementally move that up to 13, 14 hours. Some people obviously do much longer than that. There's certain disease states that people, it benefits them to do longer fasts, or maybe fast once a week or a couple times a month. So,
And if someone had a weak immune system, or maybe they have an eating disorder, or they're malnourished, then
mhm.
that would maybe not be the time to do IF, or
That would be correct. And the other actually people, although it's funny, I know some people may disagree with this, but I'm a big fan of getting people into normal glucose tolerance before they start doing intermittent fasting, because I think there's just too much dysregulation of people's energy and their adrenal function. Because obviously many people they're stuck on sugar, right? They're on this like sugar roller coaster all day long. So they don't know how really to go for periods of time fasting. They don't use fat very well. They're not fat adapted. They just need a constant flow of sugar. And so if they start to fast, all of a sudden they usually crash. Right? This is the hangriness and things like that. So first get to a point that you're changing your intake of sugar, right? So you're getting so that your glycemic balance is good. And that might mean actually snacking a little bit during the day, but doing higher fiber foods and low sugar foods to the point that you're like, okay, my blood sugar is pretty good. I feel pretty stable during the day. Let's see now if I can start fasting.
Yeah,
So that might
being
take a few weeks, but
yes, and being hangry is not productive for ourselves
yeah.
or the people that we love or the people we're around. That's
No,
definitely
no,
not.
definitely not.
Now, have you been to? This is a little bit of an off topic, but this happens sometimes on the podcast. Have you been to Busch Gardens or King's Dominion? I'm not a big fan of roller coasters. They have a lot of roller coasters
Uh-huh.
there.
I haven't, no, I haven't ridden a roller coaster in many years, but I know that it's not too far from where I live. So,
Yes, yeah, definitely check it out. It's fun, but the park is fun in general. But the roller coasters, I'm not a big fan. Sugar is a huge roller coaster for the immune system, and I think you read in the book how sugar is really the public enemy number one, right, for the immune system.
mhm.
Let's kind of
Yep.
take a dive into that a bit more. Why are people so addicted to sugar? Maybe, and is it not their fault? Is it kind of the food system, the marketing? What's kind of going on with sugar?
I, I think, I think it is because of the food system. And the only reason I say that is if you look back, and there's actually some good statistics, I don't have them at the tip of my tongue, but the amount of sugar that we ate even 50 years ago, when I was growing up, right? The people just didn't eat that much sugar. Like it was not in all, even if you had like cereal back then, or even if you had so-called junk food, it wasn't even in that as much as it is now. Um, and I think it's something like, I don't know, we'll just say like now it's like 17 teaspoons extra sugar, and back then it was like 7 or something. It's a huge difference
Yeah.
between what is found in food. And then we also just didn't have as much packaged food and as much fast food. um Kids would, for dessert you would have like, fruit, things like that. We just didn't have the same amount. And so that's really bad for lots of different reasons. Obviously it's when we have so much sugar in the system, our cells, our we can't have high blood sugar. It's very, very dangerous to our vessels. And so we want to try to get that blood sugar into the cells as quickly as possible so it doesn't do damage. And the hormone responsible for that is insulin. And so, but there's a limit to that, right? And so once insulin starts increasing, it gets to a point it gets tapped out, and we literally cannot fit any more blood sugar in to the cells. And so we end up having high blood sugar. Insulin can also cause, we can convert blood sugar to triglycerides. It can cause fatty liver disease, which is extremely damaging and dangerous. Um, and so, we end up in this very inflamed state, very high insulin. Insulin is a growth hormone, makes it very difficult to lose weight. So we get in this horrible state of obesity, high blood sugar, high insulin, and high inflammation. People are like, well, how do I get out of it? The first thing you do is literally take the sugar out.
Yeah.
Your
Yeah, it
body
seems
adapts
so
so
simple and
quickly to that.
profound, but I'm sure you know of that rat study with cocaine versus sugar, right? The sugar
Yes.
won over the cocaine. It was more addictive, and 88% of the population has metabolic syndrome, so they have at least some sort of smoldering immunotype. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah. And it
There's
is true. That you bring up the it is an addictive thing. Like, we um it triggers dopamine in the brain. It's a reward, right? Because we evolutionarily sort of move towards
who doesn't want
reward
to
and
feel pleasure? Yeah,
pain.
yeah.
Yeah, right. And there's nothing wrong with that. But over time, I think our food has become um, so high in sugar with so much extra sugar, and a lot of times also these false sugars that we just don't metabolize the same. So if you have, let's say, sucrose in a cookie or a piece of cake or something, very different than having like high fructose corn syrup, which you can take in tons and tons and tons and not have the same sort of satiation that you would from a regular molecule of sucrose. So, you have to go quite honestly through the withdrawal, and that might take weeks. It's very difficult sometimes, but it's like anything else. It's in the end, it's so important, you know?
Yeah, yeah. So in your book, you talk about sleep and stress management, movement. Let's touch on movement for a second, because I know that a lot of us are sitting around Zoom, which during the
Yeah,
pandemic, and trying to move more. Take little work breaks or breaks around your house or whatnot. What are your top
sure.
tips for movement, and how does movement really impact the immune system?
So lots, like many different ways. So for example, and I thought this was really interesting because obviously I love to exercise. Oops, sorry that um, I love to exercise. However, probably the most important thing for metabolism is just daily movement. So they've looked at this, and if you just say walk throughout the day, and this is why, doing the 10,000 steps or 15,000 steps is actually really, really foundational, or even standing versus sitting, that really impacts your metabolism more than you getting up and doing, say, a half an hour, 45 minutes of exercise. That is beneficial, no doubt. But you also want to be moving throughout the day, just doing functional movement. So that's number one. That actually makes a bigger dent into your basal metabolic rate, right? Which is, I mean, your basal metabolic rate is doing nothing, but just just daily movement, right, is really, really important. But on top of that, doing different forms of exercise can be very helpful for the immune system because we know that it can increase certain cell types. So they've looked at this in runners and cyclists, that you can have bursts of certain cells or natural killer cells, T cells, the cytokines, actually the pro inflammatory cytokines, but that's good if you're trying to fight infection, right? The most important thing, though, is that if you're doing, say, HIIT workouts or even endurance exercise, you need to recover. And a lot of people don't get adequate recovery time. And recovery time is actually a really important time for growth. In fact, if you talk to, people, athletes that are training, a lot of coaches will say, well, yes, the working out, the big workouts are really, really important, but the recovery days are just as important because that's actually when your muscles get stronger, when your cardiovascular system gets stronger, because it's during that sort of repair cycle, right? Um, so that's great. And the other thing too is that it's very, over time, doing exercises that you enjoy lowers your stress level, or actually sort of makes you more resilient or more tolerant of stress. That sort of idea about hormesis, or creating a resilience. And so daily exercise is really good for that too, just making us stronger in that category.
Yes. One more question about lifestyle. How do you feel gratitude or mindset play a role in immune balance or immune health?
I would say it's huge. And, I didn't go really into the science of this in the book. This is probably another book, right? But
Yes.
we do know that, for example, let's just talk about stress and cortisol, right? So, cortisol is very important for our immune system. And when if it's too high for long periods of time, it's very damaging. But when it's normal, when it's, we get some exposure, it can be really, really good. But let's just say someone who's chronically stressed, if you're doing a gratitude practice on a daily basis, you can literally, just with your mind, and this has been shown in, meditation studies, yoga studies, some of the Buddhist monks, um, you can really, really control and lower your basal cortisol so that it's in that nice sweet spot, right? It's not going to cause damage. Um, but I think also mindset, you know, I don't know if they have markers for this, but if you look at the blue zones, the studies of the blue zones, which is, the areas of the world where people live the longest. Now, people live the longest usually because they have very resilient immune systems. So take the people who live in Sardinia, in off the coast of Italy, they're living to 100 years old and they're walking and they're doing everything. One of the core tenets outside of nutrition and exercise is spirituality and community and purpose, life purpose, right? So waking up every day and having that feeling of, I'm here for a reason, I'm glad to be here, I'm grateful, that's gratitude, right? So we know that those inputs are so, so, so important for longevity. And that translates to me to it's important for our immune system.
Yes. Well, Heather, Dr. Moday, thank you so much for being on today. We have some closing questions for you,
Sure.
with
Yeah.
all of our guests. I'm going to do a little shake and bake here and mix it up a bit. One of the questions is on, since we just talked about joy and purpose and meaning, what do you do every day yourself to cultivate as a physician, as a leader, an author, as someone who, it sounds like, enjoys a lot of different things, but what do you do every day to cultivate joy yourself?
So, one thing is that I have animals.
Nice.
They bring me a lot of joy.
Yes.
So I really, I would say that they're big ones for me. And then, recently I've been doing more sort of just creative ventures. I think for a long time I had shut that out because I just got busy, right? And I found that that decreased my joy. So it could be something simple. It can be drawing. It could be hand lettering, which I do sometimes. Things like that just really bring me joy. It could be gardening. I try to do something like that I'm using my hands or using like a different part of my brain.
Yeah. Functional medicine is very cognitive. I think having some creative side, is good.
Some
for
sort
sure.
of creative outlet, even
Tactile.
if it's small.
Yeah. And do you have any morning routine that you do yourself, or something that's good for the immune system?
Yeah. Well, the biggest thing for me is movement in the morning, because I, like many people, find that as the day goes on, I get distracted and busy. And, when I start my day out with doing exercise, I get to be by myself. I get to think about my day. I also get a lot of energy from that. And I also make sure that I get it in. So for me, basically, I wake up, I have my lemon water. I make my delicious little cup of coffee, which I like to have, and then I do my exercise. And whether that's running, walking, Peloton, yoga, I just do something. I do something that gets me moving for 30 to 45 minutes or so, and that's really how I start my day.
It's the best way to wake up is start moving. Life is dynamic.
Moving, get outside if you can.
I'm going to give a shout out to Mike Mutzel, who is a podcaster. He does a podcast called High Intensity Health. So I'm going to actually borrow this question from him. But if you were stuck on a desert island or beach, let's say, since you're close to the beach, what would be and you had to choose like 3 supplements to pack in your bag, with you, kind of long term, what would they be? And you're sitting under that palm tree, with some of your amazing food and supplements. What would they be for you?
Well, I would say vitamin D, but if I'm on the beach, maybe not. But yeah, vitamin D would be one.
On an overcast day, you might not.
Overcast day, yeah. Vitamin D would be one. I would say the other would probably be some sort of omega-3 fatty acids, so some sort of fish oil. And lastly would probably be, that's a tough one. I figure I can eat my fermented food, so it wouldn't be a probiotic. I would say probably curcumin. Curcumin, because it's hard to get a lot of curcumin in your food, and it's multifaceted in terms of what it can do for you. So so a turmeric curcumin supplement.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you so much, Dr. Moday, for being on today. Again, for all the listeners out there, book is amazing. The Immunotype Breakthrough, just released very recently. It's doing very well, and I think it's such a worthwhile read. I've learned so much from it myself, so thank you for writing this book and being of service in that way, and explaining the immune system to all of us. And I love especially the different breakdowns of the immunotypes, because it can really focus people. If people have chronic issues, or even if they're trying to prevent illness and optimize wellness, it's really nice to have a personalized plan for the immune system. This is a book that really does that. So, Heather, how can listeners learn more about you and work with you?
So, they can find me at my website, which is www.modayscenter.com. And I actually work individually with people in certain states. So if they're in Virginia, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, we do have some other programs that people can join through our nutritionist, and that can be across the United States. And then also they can follow me at the Immunity MD on Instagram. That's where I probably hang out the most on social media, and where we post. So
I love that, Immunity MD. Well, thank you, Heather, so much for being on today, and thank you all
thanks,
for
Andrew.
listening. And we'll talk soon.
Yes, thank you so much. It was great.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to us today. If you enjoyed this conversation, please take a moment to leave us a review. It helps our podcast to reach more listeners. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss our next episodes and conversations. And thank you so much again for being with us.